E rewe kawana te awa tipua mai nā ka ui manga ki Tangaroa. Ko ai te awa, ko te awa, ko au. Kai aku nui, kai aku rahi, e te ti, e te tā, tēnā koutou katoa. E tautoko ana hau, nā me kua mea, ki ngā tangata whenua, noko nei, tia awa, nā tira, nei rā te mihi ki a koutou. Ki ngā mate, kua whitirangitia, haere, haere, haere koutou. Rātou ki a rātou, te hunga mate, o tira tātou ki a tātou, te hunga ora, tēnā tātou. He mihi hoki ki ngā whānau, nā hapu, nā iwi o te motu, me nā kai rangahau, nā kai mahi, o nā hapori, no ngā haue whā, nōku te whiwhi, kia kōrero atu, kia koutou I tēnei rā. I just want to introduce our team. We will be talking about Te Manaaki o Te Marae, our research project that we have undertaken in partnership with Te Puia Marae for the last 2 years. So, ko ai tēnei, ko rehi tinana ahau, ko Jenny Nuku. Jenny is the operations manager, the kai mahi pūtea from Te Puia, and Rau Hoskins, who is the chairperson of Matapihi and a Māori housing researcher, amongst other things. And I myself, excuse me, I am a Māori community researcher working across a number of areas, including housing, domestic violence, and intergenerational and historical trauma and the impacts of all of those on our people. Nō reira, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. This morning I want to start this kōrero about our research, and I've coined the introduction of this kaupapa Te Pūrākau o Te Puia Memorial Marae. And I just want to say that last week Professor Jenny Lee Morgan and I were writing a chapter around te haukainga ki te hauora, in particular thinking about what has happened in the Waikato Taunui iwi, with that iwi, and also what has happened at Te Puia Marae. So, Professor Jenny Lee Morgan, Director of Ngā Waiata Tui Māori and Indigenous Research Centre Unitec, and Rau Hoskins have for the past 2 years led a multidisciplinary research team who have had the privilege of working alongside the haukainga of the marae to investigate and articulate the practices of what Te Puia Marae calls its Manaaki Tangata program, in an effort to contribute to work to solve the complex issues to the inability to secure affordable housing in the Auckland region. With the support of the Marae Chair and Manaaki Tangata Director Huri Moana Dennis, Jenny Nuku and their amazing team, we have been very privileged to undertake this research. The Te Manaaki o Te Marae Research Project is a kaupapa Māori mixed methods co-designed study that was developed to engage with the many layers that existed within Te Puia Marae. One of the key components included kanohi ki te kanohi interviews, hui and wānanga with haukainga and whānau in need of homes. A total of 28 people were interviewed, whānau who stayed at the marae, haukainga, kaumātua, and of course the Manaaki tangata kaimahi. In recent times, the most well-known story of the haukainga at Te Puia is a powerful one. That is, on the 25th of May 2016, the marae opened their doors to the homeless of Tāmaki. And as we know, the haukainga generated media messages that assisted in disrupting the dominant discourses of the then-led national government. This research is a grassroots marae-led initiative that was developed to respond to real issues in real time in the community, driven by marae leadership within a kaupapa Māori framework. One of the most commanding stories that the Haukainga publicly told is that homelessness is not limited to rough sleepers and individuals. Rather, the stories of homeless whānau extended the popular view of homelessness to include what is referred to by researchers as the hidden homelessness. Rua Hodgetts and Stolt 2017. The hidden homelessness were those whānau living in cars, living in garages, living in overcrowded homes and sleeping on couches and on the floors of their whanaunga. While the Haukainga initiative to redress homelessness in the community was enacted through the Māori community approaches and practices within the marae, the basis of understanding and responding to homelessness and to associated government agencies and services responsible for the provision of assistance comes from a deep knowing, experience and remembering of enduring homelessness themselves. At Te Puia Marae, the stories of landlessness, homelessness and devastation of not only today, but of the experience by their tūpuna are retold through whai kōrero, waiata, tongikura and pūrākau on a daily basis. On the marae, it is often pointed out by the Haukainga and wider Waikato Tainui iwi that homelessness is not new to them, but something that they intimately identify with as the original homeless in our homelands. I refer to the events of 9 July 1863, when an ultimatum was issued that required the people of in Māngania and surrounds to either swear allegiance to the Queen, to their tribal, swear allegiance to the Queen or surrender their property. Choosing to stay true to their whakapapa and alliance to their tribal group, they were forced from their homes by the colonial forces. Days later, British troops crossed the Mangatawhiri stream and unprovoked declared war upon Waikato and the Kingitanga. Some of the most powerful stories of Te Puia are the stories of whānau transformation through the culturally grounded practices of manaakitanga. Manaakitanga is often and popularly translated as hospitality and generosity. However, it has a far deeper meaning, especially in the context of marae. In brief, the concept of manaakitanga to show enhances the mana on both sides of the relationship. Those who fulfill their obligations to show kindness or provide hospitality, as well as those who accept that kindness or hospitality. Manaakitanga rests on the deep cultural understanding of our relationships with each other and with the natural world around us. In the past 3 years, from 24 May 2016 to today, over 390 individuals have stayed at Te Puia Marae, a total of 87 whānau groups. Shortly after Te Puia offered emergency accommodation in 2016, the Haukainga made a decision based on their ability to manaaki within the temporary cabins and facilities set up at the rear of the marae that they would only look after whānau. With 6 cabins, the team caters to whānau groups from 2 to a maximum of 8, maybe, people. The Manaaki Tangata program can care for up to 25 people at a time. While the Manaaki Tangata program does not explicitly include te reo and tikanga teaching and learning, the marae experience enables people to just be Māori in a very Māori space, which for many coming from a state of crisis is a profound experience. Mason Jury's 1994 research articulates that 2 of the key whānau Māori hauora indicators are the connection to whakapapa, knowledge, and tūranga waiwai. When these 2 critical mātauranga Māori components are missing, it is very challenging for whānau Māori to find a state of hauora. Outside the marae, whānau can struggle to survive and can become enmeshed in a world of poverty where feelings of hopelessness dominate. Te Puia Marae and the Manaaki Tangata program allow whānau to hope and dream, to recalibrate, to reclaim their agency, and most importantly, to be whānau. At the marae, identities are formed in relation to each other. People are not merely seen as the individual researcher or the homeless person, but as whānau that are connected through hapu, through iwi, and through communities. There is, without doubt, something special happening at Te Puia Marae, evidence in the stories of whānau themselves, which is embedded in the kawa, tikanga and ritinga of marae throughout Aotearoa. To conclude this kōrero, I want to just invoke at this time the words of Te Puia Herangi. Mehe mea ka moe a au, ko au anake. Mehe mea ka moe a tātou, ka taia e tātou. If I were to dream alone, only I would benefit. If we all dream together, we could achieve anything. Nō reira, rauranga tirama, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ngā mihi.
Ko Jenny toku ingoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. I'm a whānau of Te Puia Marae, and I will do an overview and plus a riff about our marae and Manaaki tangata. 2016, Marae Committee, Marae Trustees, Marae Whānau, and mainly Marae Komatu were approached by our rangatahi, voicing concerns about homeless in South Auckland. Via social media, our rangatahi were very verbal, and we're very concerned. They too, the committee and trustees met just to find our thoughts, what are we going to do, how are we going to do it, and what is the crisis out there. Day 3, we had a structure, and we implemented a meeting with community and whānau organisations, and had the blessings from our Komatu and Papakāinga. Yes, we will open our doors. So this action of opening the doors at Te Puia Marae was over a 3-day period. Lucky we had a strong trustee chairperson, one that had experience with ministry and experience with police. So he brought a structure to us that was strong. You know, we had to introduce what our aims are and issues, have a method approach of designing methods, key findings or results once we take in these people, because we had no understanding what will be walking through our doors. Our focus was just kids and parents. Discussions and conclusions, and implications for practice and policies, because we knew this would come. So our doors was open May 25th, and they did roll in. Brought to our attention straight away, we had rough sleepers, we had singles, we had students, and then the families came in. Mum, dad's children, mum and children, dad and children. We then knew we couldn't operate how a marae would operate. We couldn't just have everyone staying in one place, sharing our whare. We knew we had to have policies. We started to learn the Acts, Vulnerable Children's Acts. So within 2 weeks, we brought in other providers to help us house and accommodate individuals and our rough sleepers. And then we put our focus onto families with children. 2017, we decided to work with MSD. So we opened our doors again, July, and then we looked at employment for our whānau. Within our marae whānau, we actually had expertise. We had those that were social workers, those that had skills in admin. So coming from a marae, we had the normal hosting, cleaning, and making sure we manaaki our guests, our patrons. We just implemented those skills to the back with those within our whānau that had skills in the community sector, whether it was social work, admin, and health. So in 2016, we operated for 3 months period. 2017, 5-month period. 2018, 11-month period. 2019, 5-month period. So a total of 24 months. 19 months as a transitional housing provider alongside MSD, Housing New Zealand, and HUD. Our communication with these agencies is excellent. They understand our program, especially being Marae-based and being a Māori provider. Te Puia Memorial Marae Manaaki Tangata e Rua has assisted 415 heads as of yesterday, the 4th of June, 91 whānau family clients, 154 adults, 261 children, tamariki, from the ages of 18 down to 3 weeks. Our family dynamics, employment, low to medium income earners, MSD beneficiaries, solo de facto, job seekers, and uni students. Our outcomes, well, in our eyes, as whānau, as marae whānau, and as staff, excellent. We endeavour to keep across the families, even families we had in 2016, we still visit, to ensure that they are coping with life skills, keeping a roof over their house, over themselves, feeding, and getting their bills paid. We endeavour that if they are ready for employment, we help them, assist them if they haven't got full licence. And we work with other providers if there are needs for counselling, education, health needs. We have come across a lot of children that are very sick. We have come across a lot of mums that have, well, within themselves, no morals, need a hand, their self-esteem is diminished. And I must admit, even dads, we had solo dads, but they have proven, once settled in a home, and once having assistance from whānau or support, they have flourished a great deal. Okay. We ensure that providers, once they leave our premises, whether it's general health, mental health, marriage counselling, counselling across the board, education, employment, keep in contact. Whānau will let us know if they feel a bit lost, and we will contact these agencies again. We do not leave them. We don't intend to leave them. Our Māori kaupapa and marae-based is very exclusive, it's very sound, it's very Māori, and our main objective is manaaki tangata, as all our marae and all our Māori people do. Okay, the marae, the only marae entity that has sustained complete domination and takeover by colonisation. They remain a gathering place for many things, even though colonisation, so why wouldn't a marae be a place to not only run a homeless program, but also deliver wider social service provision to marae whānau. The whānau is the marae manaaki tangata e rua strategy. It keeps us safe. It sends messages to officials and visitors that there are rules and kaua here. Don't come and bring an overlay of Pākehā systems and processes when we have our own. Our point of this difference is we have developed a model that embraces the LORE and the LAW. Our tolerance levels are higher, our measure of success is unique, our decision making is innovative, our understanding of relationships and partnerships is advanced, and our follow the well-known footsteps of our koe te puea. She set the foundation for us. We are doing the same thing she did in 18th century, early 19th century. Manaaki Tangata Rua focuses what goes into the homes and keeping them there rather than bricks and mortar. We know they have to go, but keeping them in their homes is just as important. We know this kōrero well, the economics solution. We hope that iwi have a collected position, direction and strategy. The economic solution will be visible, supported and deliverable, but right now they are all doing their own things at different levels. At times, nothing will really get better until they all join at the hips. It is a given that they have serviced the needs of their own people. We understand this, but they must surely be able to find some genetic or common ground position or agreement on something. Papakāinga development is not really our forte or our interest at the moment. We focus on whānau and their well-being. Quantity and quality is the current government strategy of quantity, the best course of action. Housing whānau into houses within our Māori region. We have got a lot of new streets, a lot of beautiful homes. But what has gone into some of those homes? We had placed family into one street, a street of 25 residents, and they actually feel unsafe. Within that street in Māngere, there has been weekly police visits, rape, children just running loose to all hours of the night. And because of our whānaus that are with us on the marae, whether it's over a month period to a 3-month period, they know what our values are and what we want for them is safety. So within this, we actually see some slums and have some concerns because what are going in these houses? We know other providers are trying their best to ensure that families that are going in houses are families right for purpose. Manaaki tangata will not let any whānau into a house until we're sure they are right for purpose. So we have concerns there. And as I said, I'll give an overview. Over the 3 days, you'll hear from our manager. Also, we have concerns with hotels. We have whānau that, because in the hotel they do not pay any rent and do not wish to go to any provider but are issued by MSD, mainly for the reason that they have done their 3-month period in a hotel, do not wish to pay rent, because in most hotels they are allowed to come and go as they please, do as they please. They do not want to be in an area where there is discipline. And yes, we have discipline on the marae, but it's a discipline that is manageable. It's just something we're finding with a lot of our families, they don't want, or they haven't had. Also our rangatahi. Now our rangatahi are ambitious. resourceful. They seen their parents or parent in the bad, in the lowest. Once they come on site, it's like a relief, because you find a lot of our teenagers are the ones babysitting their parents. You find a lot of our tamariki are the ones offering our parents. And just the whole aura, once coming onto the marae, or mainly because Manaaki tangata is located at the rear of the marae, it's like they've opened up their overcoat and they're allowing help, they're allowing assistance. By day 2, they are talking to our social workers about their concerns. Prior to the parents talking to the social workers, the children are already talking to all the whānau on the marae. Oh, we are glad to be here. Oh, mum and dad's not arguing. So this is where I'm going to leave it, because as there are many colleagues here that have a lot and done the research on the marae. So kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora mai tātou. Ngā mihi nui kia koe, Jenny. Koutou rā ngā haukainga o Te Puea Memorial Marae. Mihi kauake kia koutou. Just carrying on from Rihi and Jenny's kōrero about the Te Puea Memorial Marae journey, just reflecting on the colonisation process that has happened to the marae itself. As you can see here in 1967, 2 years after opening, Te Puea Marae, located in Māngere Bridge, is still connected to the Māngere Inlet. Still has quite a lot of garden activity going on around it. And at this point in time, certainly no motorway and no major new bridge. This is Te Puea Marae in 2018, and you can see the motorway off-ramp there has cut the marae off from the Māngere Inlet, and then the new and widened motorway development to the airport and Manukau has impinged greatly on the marae. And you can see here these are the cabins that currently provide the accommodation for the Manaaki tangata model. And essentially what they do is they allow the marae to carry on acting as a marae, and all of the workings of the Jenny, Nuku and Huri and the team occur in this area here. So I think it's an inspirational story of a marae who've stepped up to a problem which was becoming undeniable and done it in their own way. And I guess what I'll just be speaking about for the next 10 minutes or so is to reflect on how else other marae may wish to embark on their own housing journeys. And if we reflect on Moana Jackson's keynote earlier and his future notion of a righteous kāinga, it is important to remember that our marae were always at the heart of our kāinga, and it was in the late 19th century, early 20th century that our marae became islands of their own, with our kāinga more remotely located as we embraced or were coerced into the agricultural revolution that swept the country, which effectively dispersed our Māori whānau across wider parts of their remaining lands and meant that they weren't living in very close proximity to their marae. And then fast forward to World War II, and we have the dramatic urbanisation that was part of the second phase of the colonial project that Moana has referred to. And Māori at that time were not exclusively, but largely housed by the Department of Māori Affairs and state advances. And while the houses that they moved to were not culturally conducive to whānau dynamics, they were of a reasonable quality. And of course, those early state houses were located and pepper potted around our new urban suburbs. And of course, with full employment, or relatively full employment at that time, Māori had a level of prosperity until the early to mid-1970s, when the oil crisis hit and unemployment began to be a thing. So in that 1960s, 70s, 80s period, we had a large growth of different tautāhere and mātāwaka whānau developing marae in their urban homes in order to fulfil the lack that existed in their lives, the cultural lack, the inability to be Māori in the cities, and to provide a cultural, spiritual connection and a place to come together. And so Te Puea Memorial Marae is unique insofar as it is both a mana whenua and a mātāwaka marae. It exists very much as a part of the kingitanga, strongly connected to the kingitanga, with Te Puea herself being instrumental in setting up the marae. And yes, and it also caters for the people of Mangere and Mangere Bridge and the whole of Tāmaki. Also has a strong Ngāpuhi connection, which reflects the marriage of Pōtatau Te Wherowhero's brother to Mātire Toha, the daughter of Rewa, one of the key Ngāpuhi chiefs of the treaty era. So Te Puea marae have stepped up in the way that they have, and yet there are 75 marae in Auckland, and so the work that we've been doing is to look and explore a range of different models and ways in which other marae may wish to step into the housing arena again, and in so doing reconnect the notion of marae and kāinga. So how might these marae kāinga be established, and what might they look like? And remembering our original marae kāinga were quite densely populated, but populated in a way which sat within a vast tribal estate. So we lived quite close together, but we had access to vast resources. And we did move around. We did normally have 2 to 3 different tribal bases: kāinga tahi, kāinga rua, and often kāinga toru. Te Puea herself was very mindful of the grinding poverty that her people experienced and the housing conditions in Waikato Tainui. And here she is opening a hybrid raupo Western-style bungalow in the 1930s. And these are the typical state houses of the 50s, 60s. And at that time, of course, large backyards for fruit trees and gardens. And our people certainly did garden when they came to the cities to supplement their food requirements. So just reflecting also that we've had this crisis named in 2016, named very directly through the media by Te Puea Memorial Marae. And there are other marae in Tāmaki that have stepped up in their own ways, Papakura Marae, Manurewa Marae as well, among others, who have provided a level of support to homeless people that they could with the resources that they had available. So we've looked at 4 to 5 different models, and those models are firstly acknowledging a transitional housing model that Te Puia Memorial Marae are providing, requires a high-functioning marae with a real strong ability to provide manaakitanga. Te Puia also very blessed with highly skilled people and strong leadership at governance and management levels. Not all urban marae have got those resources available to them. The next part of the model is next model that we've looked into is permanent whanau housing. Where marae are large enough to provide for permanent housing, there's certainly an opportunity for those whanau who are most closely involved with core marae roles to be housed on those marae. There's also a real need for student hostels, perhaps a modern version of the or the trade training or the student hostels that were created in the 50s and 60s. We have Māori students living in highly stressed housing situations and thereby not able to achieve at their highest levels. And so there's a strong need or a strong opportunity for some marae to look at hostels as a way of enabling their rangatahi to come to town, to be supported in quality accommodation, and to have auntie and uncle type figures providing active roles in their lives. Komatu Accommodation, 1965, the Department of Māori Affairs released the first Komatu-based accommodation, and Komatu flats were developed up until the end of the 1980s under that scheme. And the last model that we've looked at here is a nano whare, or a tiny house village. And this image here provides a sense of multiple smaller dwellings which, while they are self-contained, they utilise the high-quality dining ablutions facilities that most marae have in the urban areas. So you can retreat to your smaller house, but you can utilise those facilities, which are often underutilised. Another image here of a development proposed for and near Manurewa Marae in South Auckland. We're looking at medium density models here, acknowledging the preciousness of land in Auckland and land values. The core dimension of this design typology is to have a central communal facility, in this case a communal laundry, lounge area, a place where people can come together and support each other better, and while still maintaining their level of independence and connection to the marae. Another view. Again, other models which are associated with those marae on the periphery of Auckland, which still have quite large land holdings associated with them. So we're talking about this set of models is appropriate for Tauranga, Mātāwaka and Manawhenua marae. And so where we're heading to with these set of designs is a symposium on the 10th of July at Unitec in Auckland, where we're going to release our book on these typologies and also have an exhibition. And so the encouragement really is for those who are in Tāmaki and associated with various marae to come and engage and be inspired and see where they may wish to locate their particular housing journeys. Again, cluster house development here, acknowledging that we never lived in remote individual dwellings. We always lived in close proximity to each other, so that extended whānau could always be there for support. Another image for Pirangatahi marae. a marae that we've partnered with on this project, and the Peringatahi marae is a Tauruhere Ngāpuhi marae in West Harbour. And in this case, we're looking at 3-level, medium-density, intergenerational whānau homes, again with a communal central laundry and lounge, and with a separate Komatu whare here with ramp access to both levels, and a kaitiaki flat located at the ground level. And just to conclude, in acknowledging Te Puea Marae and their journey, you've seen the cabins that they currently operate their Manaaki tangata model from. They have active plans for a 50-resident transitional housing village whereby they can carry on the high-quality work that they're engaged with, but with facilities which are more conducive to more numbers that they're proposing to house, and an ongoing commitment to our whānau in Tamaki who have washed up at the doorstep of Te Puea Marae or been referred directly through the various agencies that Jenny has talked about. So finally, just to acknowledge the institution of marae as central to Māori aspirations, Māori urban well-being, and as a place that has been the centre of adaptation. Our marae have moved from the core facilities of meeting houses, dining halls, ablutions blocks. In the 1980s, they added kohanga reo and programs buildings. And now it is hoped that those that have the land and resources and appetite will also be able to reforge the notion of kāinga within their marae sites and provide those fundamental levels of home that have been referred to this morning. Ngā mihi nui.
Kia ora koutou. Huri o ngā tukanuna ke ritaunga, ngā tutu whareto me ngā puhi hoki. He kaimahi rangahau Māori, me kai hohoa whenua ko Jacqueline tōku ingoa.
Kia ora koutou, ko Whanau, ko James Bergen taku ingoa. He uri tēnei no te rarawa me te aupōri, no ahipara me te oneroa tohea hau, kei o te poti taku kāinga I nainei. So my name is James Bergen. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Otago. I wasn't sure whether to say this, but I'm going to say it. I'm aiming to submit my PhD by the end of the year. So I've said it to a whole bunch of people. Therefore, there's a lot of people that I have to put the pressure on that I actually have to follow through with that. But myself and Jackie are 2/3 of a Rangatahi project as part of the KTKR team. We are going to try and riff at the same time, so hopefully this creates some harmonies, but I apologise if it's not quite sweet music. But.
Before we get started, I always do this everywhere I go. All right, hands up if you are under 30. We got more than the last one, yes. And half of those are my friends anyway, so by the rest of it, we're going to have new friends. And it's awesome to have a much larger presence. The rest of you guys, you're my aunties and uncles now, or you're my kuros and you're my nannies. Cool. And so it's really important that we have, we've had our hype girl, Dr. Jessica Hutchings, hype us up before we got here. And so we really appreciate, firstly, just to, mihi for having our back and supporting our kaupapa. It takes leadership to be able to support us, resource us, and let us do the mahi. So what an awesome opportunity and a brown privileged opportunity to be here and share our mahi with you all. And so hopefully we'll fly through it. Like James said, this is our ropu. We're all under 30 still.
Yeah, so our rangatahi definition has some fuzzy boundaries.
Under
30, no, under 30.
So we've cast it between 17 and 30, and so we worked on this project last year for about 6 to 8 months, contracting included. And so it was an awesome opportunity for us, rangatahi Māori, to do research with rangatahi Māori. And so being in this team for about 2 years now, I've been able to work in a space where we get to work with people, young people from across the motu and hear, what does housing mean for them? And so we'll fly through this. We're just really here to share some of their voices. Who cares about what we do? So this conversation kind of started out of this idea where if you're not at the table, you might find yourself on the menu. That's your idea, eh? How did that come about?
Yeah, so it's kind of like if you're not at the table, voice, you might end up you kind of risk ending up on the chopping block, so to speak. And rangatahi Māori are often not part of the conversation when it comes to decisions around shaping the future of our cities. So this project was really about what do rangatahi Māori want in terms of housing? What are their aspirations for the future? How do they want to live? And how can we as rangatahi Māori researchers start to ask those sort of questions?
And so as part of that process, we were lucky to have Rihi and Ella as part of our tuakana framework support us and guide us in that space, which has been really awesome because sometimes we're a bit crazy, but they put us on the right path. And that's kind of where that, we've got that solid foundation and that backing from everyone. So, how do we go next? Okay, cool. There we go.
Yeah, so why do we look at rangatahi Māori? And I've just put up the graphs of kind of the demographics of Māori and non-Māori by age. And you can sort of see the pyramid shape for Māori and, ironically, kind of like a house shape for non-Māori. But as at the 2013 census, the median age for Māori is approximately 24 years. So half of Māori are under the age of 24. There's a large portion of that that'll be under voting age. So that's just an interesting kind of thing to think about in terms of what political voice is there for rangatahi Māori out there. In comparison, the median age for non-Māori is around 41 years. So there's a slight, just some interesting kind of things from that.
Cool. So our research, we looked at two streams. Firstly, we looked at understanding what aspirations are for rangatahi Māori. And so we worked across the country with 3 different focus groups, I guess you call it. And then secondly, around, rangahau, what does that look like? A lot of young people don't even know what research is. So kind of bringing that awareness and providing a space and opportunity where they can engage in. So that was really, I guess, the overarching idea and where we started.
Yeah, and that's how we're going to frame the presentation today. So we're going to look at some of the rangahau processes and what lessons we learned from that, and then look at the kainga aspects and what we learned from that. So in terms of rangahau or research, what did we do? So we ran 3 wānanga in 3 sites across New Zealand. So one in Kaikohe in the far north, one in Auckland, and one in Dunedin. We had roughly 10 participants at each one, with some really diverse groups of rangatahi. So we did each one around August last year, and they kind of ended up being about 4 to 6 hours long. So quite an energy input, but some really valuable findings came out of that. And there's kind of a disclaimer we just wanted to put in as well, that we had a really limited time frame and quite a limited budget as well. So we kind of capitalized on our existing social networks, the areas that we're familiar with, to try and get the most bang for our buck, I suppose, by doing it this way. But diverse rangatahi, we had urban and rural backgrounds, diverse living situations, so ones in high school through to ones working professionals, ones with young families of their own. And then we also wanted to capture different rangatahi with kind of different levels of comfort or access in te ao Māori. So some just on the beginning of their journey in terms of te ao Māori, with some others that are perhaps a bit more comfortable with it. So each wānanga generally started with a welcome or pōwhiri, depending on the location. Went through some introductions and whakawhanaungatanga, and then we spent the rest of the day doing a whole bunch of activities that we'll talk about in the second half about housing. So this is just a quick photo of one of the activities we did where we split up in groups and tried to design a Papakāinga using a bunch of materials. So what did we learn?
A lot. And so this is our friend Pania Newton, who's in the house over there. And how we kind of started was we tend to get all these flash speakers and keynotes where we wanted to ground it in the local context. And so for Tāmaki, we had Pania Newton talk about her kaupapa over at her mātau. Up in Kaikohe, we had a young 17-year-old who'd pretty much done a thesis, share his mahi on how he was going to respond to homelessness. And then in Dunedin, we had, masters? Honours. Another young Māori speak about his whakapapa and his journey in terms of what he was doing in Te Ao Māori. So we've already got some awesome potential out there. It's about tapping into those networks and providing a space for them to share. And that was one of the, most amazing learnings where they were able to, lead the way, show their peers what they're capable of, and just support our rangatahi, what they might aspire to do as well.
Yeah, for me that was really key in terms of the research process, because when you think about that kind of power dynamic of researchers and participants, it helped to shift that and balance it out a bit more. We were sitting there learning from rangatahi as they presented some work with us as well. And of course, from a kaupapa Māori approach, super important, especially when we're doing 4 to 6 hours, so we had heaps of food, which was great.
And koha as well. So it was really interesting trying to explain that to an institution around how does that work. So that's an interesting learning for us, but also ensuring that young people recognise and value their time. I don't want to swear, but that don't come for free. So allowing them to, because they're so undervalued, but they need to recognise from themselves that their voice is important and their time is important as well. And so, some of the conversations, I think this was pretty cool. Rangatahi was like, it was fun today, and I thought the housing thing would have been kind of like a boring thing, but I got into it. And for us, it was really awesome to reflect on, this kind of feedback, where some of these rangatahi would not have been exposed to these types of learning, or asked, what are their aspirations for the future. So again, providing a space and a platform for them to be involved. Some of them are really political. You just need to be able to exercise and facilitate some of those conversations.
Cool. One of the other second learnings around the rangahau process was the role of the physical setting that the wānanga took place. So the photos on the left are of Arco, an architectural studio up in Kaikohe. The centre photos are the Unitec Marae up in Auckland. And then on the far right, we've got Otago University, quite an institutional setting for that third wānanga.
And so it was really interesting to observe and learn some of the dynamics and how you communicate with young people and the difference that it makes being in an environment that you can connect with and you're familiar with. And so within the studio, it took a bit of time and a bit of work to allow them to feel comfortable in that space. On the marae, from pōwhiri process right to whanaungatanga, we were diving deep, like we're whānau now. And so it's amazing how you can just connect in a marae, and then the institution, anyone from Dunedin here before I drag them? No. So it's an interesting space where if you're walking down a hallway and there's European male in a surveying institute into a room to wānanga, that's awkward, it's weird. But these are the types of things we need to be observant of, because if we're working with young people and we get them to come to us and we don't change our own processes around how we engage, we're going to lose them and their voice are going to be lost in these future processes. So thinking about these types of things, these types of processes and the tikanga behind it is really important, yeah? Cool.
So the second strand was kāinga. So what did we do in terms of the kāinga aspect of the research? So as well as having the keynote speaker there, we ran 4 separate activities through the day looking specifically at housing in Papakāinga. So the first one was kind of a speed dating exercise where we got rangatahi to pair up and interview each other on what their current housing situation is like. So where do you live? What kind of house do you live in? How many people do you live with? What do you like and dislike about it? Just to try and kind of ease them into the day. Then the second activity was this axis line. So we had a piece of tape across a table or on the floor, and that acted as a continuum. So we posited a whole bunch of different kind of dichotomies, and then the rangatahi would put a post-it somewhere along the spectrum of where they thought they sat in terms of, say, their current housing situation or where they might aspire it to be. So one example was neighbouring. We might have at one end, you don't know any of your neighbours. At the other end, you know the whole neighbourhood. So we did the kind of exercise of where are you sitting now and where would you like that to be? What's your aspirational kind of views of neighbouring? The third exercise, we had some big housing questions, so usually after lunch, because we needed lunch after that exercise. We just had a bunch of big posters around the room and people were kind of free range free-range chickens, with a whole bunch of post-its trying to answer these big housing questions. So things like, what makes for a healthy home or a neighbourhood? What's important in a home and neighbourhood? What do you think the future holds for you in terms of housing? I think we had sort of 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. And what do you see as the most pressing barriers or challenges to achieving those kind of goals and aspirations?
And I just quickly want to touch on kind of the kōrero that Moana Jackson was talking about, the difference between a home and a house. And so one of the most important kōrero that came out of that from the Tāmaki Rangatahi was that, a house is bricks and mortar, but a home is where you feel loved, yeah? And so emphasizing that in everything was so important. And that's what grounded everybody in terms of that values-based approach.
Cool. And that last exercise was kind of like a modelling workshop. So we picked a local site for each wānanga and got a whole bunch of materials, Play-Doh, all sorts of things. And in groups we had a chance to design a Papakāinga for a local site. So there were some crazy ideas. I think there was a gigantic KFC restaurant in the shape of a chicken drumstick. But there were some other really cool ideas with some Komatu housing, apartments, and how that all worked together. I think there was like a Komatu led childcare kind of operation in one of them. So lots of cool ideas came out of that.
And it's important that we don't just sit in terms of thinking. Now, it was interesting to see how that manifests by, doing tangible things. They want to think about, okay, so what does this look like? That's always tricky, but providing, those types of resources to exercise that was really cool.
So a couple of key findings that we wanted to chat about in terms of the kāinga aspect. Jackie, you can have this one.
So this one came out of Dunedin. I want to really emphasise that this is the reality of where our rangatahi are living. And I know Jess has touched, surface level, but this is it. And this is scary because we continue to allow this to happen. We're okay with this culture, especially in Dunedin, around, they will, that rite of passage, we'll rough it, it's the culture, it's all good. But to hear, and see the realities of what's happening down there is scary. I knew it was bad, but not that bad. And even the struggles that they were having around trying to get it cleaned was a mission. 6 months later, how many hospital and doctor's visits? So where are we going to start changing and influencing these processes and valuing their voices, but also supporting them, whatever that looks like. And so we pay so much on average, $150 per room, and there's black rot and white rot. It's disgusting. So there's always this notion that young people will thrive, they're doing amazing. But are we going to expect them to thrive in these types of conditions? It's not okay. And so this is why this project is important, because we start to spark these conversations and really start thinking about accountability, because it's not good enough. Yeah, that's me.
So as well as the current housing situations as well, there were some interesting findings in terms of housing aspirations. So what do you want for the future? And it's quite cool because there's quite a few positive ones in this word cloud, so home, whānau, living, house. But there are also the not so positive ones. We've got bills, hoops, unaffordable, debt, crash.
And so this is, even though this is just very surface level stuff, it's important to highlight that different areas we started having different conversations. The younger ones tend to be a lot more optimistic than the other end of the spectrum. We're quite pessimistic, which is worrying. But even the shift around this idea of home ownership. And for those who were at the last Māori housing for Auckland, when I asked Nanaia around, Nanaia Mahuta, convinced me that there's hope for our generation around this idea of home ownership. Because the reality is that it's so far to reach, where our ideals are starting to shift for young people. We're facing all these issues at the core. Actually, they're just living to try and get by, to put food on the table, which I'm sure so many can connect with. But how are we going to change this process together is really important. And so another kōrero that came out was, I guess our generation isn't focusing on housing because it seems so far out of reach. And so emphasizing that this is their voices, this is what they're saying. We're just the facilitators and, thinking about the access to spaces like this that we have. So continue to support them. If it's your children or, your adopted whānau and students, really think about how you might be able to manaaki that.
Yeah, and this is particularly true in Dunedin, this quote, that students often felt like Dunedin was a temporary home because they're only really there for uni, and only one of the participants saw themselves living there in the long term, partly due to the standard of housing, but also perhaps due to a lack of effort in terms of making them feel valued in the city. So it kind of begs the question of how might you create more connected communities for more transient short-term groups of people as well.
And so this is just a snippet of our project. And it's been a really awesome, really awesome kaupapa to share and lead. But we're really excited to think about how we might be able to learn more from different diverse, rangatahi. This is only Kaikohe, Tamaki Makaurau, and Dunedin. But what's really scary is that if this is some of the issues that our most privileged are facing, imagine what's happening in our rural communities where some people don't have access to the basic infrastructure. And I know because the other day my family just got walls on their, walls and light fixtures in their home in the far north. So I've seen it, but that's something to celebrate. But, we tend to be in these spaces where we take advantage of this basic infrastructure that we have. It's all good. But some of our whānau don't. And so I know that we're all collectively trying to change that, and it's really important that we start, for us, we have our social responsibility to rangatahi Māori and giving them a voice, but collectively, we need to be all on this waka, heading in the same direction, yeah? Cool. Yeah. Well, that's a snippet into some of the kaupapa that we're doing. We're looking forward to sharing this more and having a wider conversation. Tēnei te mihi kia koutou. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. He uri no te aroa waka. Ko Ngāti Pike o te iwi. Ko John Reid. Aho. My name's John Reid. I'm based at the Ngāi Tahu Research Centre, which is in the University of Canterbury. Probably pulling closely on the themes that Moana was pulling on, and with the title here, Tenants in Their Own Land. Now, I'll just outline So I'll just first outline our team. So we're the Whairawa Whenua team, so we're the economic team. Our kai whakahaere is Angus McFarlane, Professor Angus McFarlane. He's been a great guide for our research and provided us with a lot of structure and direction on where to head and what to investigate and how to investigate. We've got another one of our team members here too, Diane Menzies. She's down the bottom left there of the photo and also sitting down here. Diane's put in a huge effort into this project, and so much of the information that you'll see presented comes from a lot of her hard work. The rest of our team can't be here today, but they're spread across the universities, from the University of Canterbury to Otago University. And so what I'll be doing is presenting our various pieces of work all together. So what our research did was to look at trends. So we're looking at changes in Māori forms of tenancy over time, and then we're looking at the factors that kind of underpin those trends. And then we're looking at ways to reverse negative trends and encourage positive trends. So, this is the first trend that we're looking at. And that bottom blue line is Māori living in their family home from 1936. And we've gone through to 2013 where we've got data too, but beyond 2013, we've done some projections of where we think things are heading. So we have this first period, which Ro was just talking about before, and that first period was when Māori were in the kāinga. So from up to the 1930s, when Māori weren't highly urbanised at this stage, only about 10% were living in urban areas. Most were living in rural areas in their kāinga, small villages, usually in coastal areas. And you can see from 1936, we see this sudden drop in home ownership because over 70%, 73% of Māori lived in their own homes in 1936. But then we see a drop off, which is related to not being able to build on your own land and also the transition into World War II and the need for Māori to move to the cities. And then we just see a sort of a steady decline. But you see that decline's happening in two ways. The decline's happening, first of all, because people are arriving to the city, but at the same time, so they're coming to the cities houseless, but at the same time, they are coming into home ownership. So we can see that so we're seeing a slight decline, but then we see quite a pickup. In 1981, we see Māori housing rates almost reach 60%. So why was this happening? And so that's some of the questions we're thinking about. So if Māori could enter housing quite quickly and rapidly during a certain period in history, why can't we do that again now? And if we look closely, we see that 86% of Māori were financed by Māori Affairs. So this was direct finance lending from the government to Māori. We also had income-related rents. So Māori could be staircased into housing, so you could rent and save and get into a home. And also we had substantial social housing. So there was this kind of a wraparound package for Māori to step into urban areas which enabled them to enter into housing. Then we have something called the 1991 Mother of All Budgets. And this is when the state reduced their interventions into the housing market. In other words, they stepped out, and which we know as neoliberalism. So we had neoliberalism being introduced from 1984, but in 1991 was really when the government stepped out of the housing market. And then you can just see where the graph goes from there. So it happened at the same time as a recession, unemployment, and stagnant wages. So not only were incomes falling, but support into housing was also reducing. Then these are two different future trends I've just mapped onto here. One is if declines keep happening as they have done from 1991, it just keeps declining. That's the bottom blue line. Only 15% of Māori will be in their own homes in 2 generations. And then you can see that the lines between Pākehā and Māori are almost the same, except Māori rates are dropping faster. Now this is another graph showing the landlords of renters. So first of all, in 1991, most Māori that were renting in government provided accommodation, those who were renting. But with 1991, you can see this point here, the neoliberal reform. You can just see the numbers of private renters go through the roof, and then the social housing decline. But the social housing declines are actually a lot faster than that because population was growing at the same time. So we've probably seen social housing halve. And private rentals triple in number, or just about triple in number, and 3 times Māori in private rentals now than in social rentals. And in 2004, we made up only 2.2% of landlords. Now there's 1 million rental properties. I suspect Māori would be roughly the same, making only 2.2% of the landlords taking advantage of that situation. So there's a lot of questions. People talk about whether owning or renting, is renting a bad thing? Is owning better than renting? But the research is clear on that. There's strong associations between home ownership and positive social and economic outcomes. Rental tenure isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily associated with negative outcomes. But to generate good outcomes, you need 4 things. You need good physical conditions. You need good houses. You need to have good protection and security. You need to have renting perceived as the norm. And it needs to be affordable. And most of these attributes you couldn't sort of associate with most of New Zealand's housing stock. So what we want to do is we want Māori to own their own homes, and where that's not possible, we want them to rent quality homes. And basically we need to reverse the home ownership trends, and we need to improve rental quality and affordability. So that's I've got a report on this section which will be available, and Jess is having published up at the moment, which outlines this in detail. Now I'm just going to take you through a second piece of research which has been done by Jay and Grace. And this is data from the Christchurch Health and Development Study, which has been following a cohort of Māori since 1977. It's about 150. and information has been gathered on about 22 occasions with them. So it's mapping them over their life course. And so what this research is looking at, if they could find anything that could predict whether you would own your own home or not, or whether you had no chance. And when we look at the 5 sort of characteristics that predict home ownership in Māori, the first one, these are the 5 indicators. I'll just run them first through. Low income and wealth, a history of substance dependence, a history of welfare dependence, low relationship stability, and low education expectations. If you have all 5 of those characteristics, you have about a 10% chance of having a home, owning your own home. But those 5 characteristics are pretty much the characteristics of poverty. So we can see that it's primarily a socio-economic condition. And we know the underlying colonial processes that sit underneath that, the global economic shifts and everything else that gives rise to that type of scenario. But if you have all 5, and there were about 20% of those in the study who did have who had none of the 5, they had about an 86% chance of owning their own home. So you can see there's significant correlations, these are causation, between owning your own home and not living in poverty. I'm not sure I have enough time to cover the next one. So I'm trying to think about, and this is Komatu Angus was saying, it's about, coin the phrase, back to the future. Do we need to start looking at what's been done in the past, which were quite simple, constructive solutions, doing something on scale? And so this is where I'm sort of thinking. I think a lot of the lessons have been learned in the past and about what we can do. But there's a few conclusions I've got here. One is home ownership is important. The removal of market interventions to support Māori into housing have caused significant decline in ownership and renting. So I think that links back strongly to neoliberalism and its impact. So we're also seeing a lot related to unemployment, downturns, stagnant wages, and so on. And we're also seeing owning a home as predicted by indicators associated with wealth, social security, education, and health. So I think it is primarily a socio-economic structural problem for which disadvantaged Māori are experiencing. And it needs sort of significant state intervention now, because if we see that future trend playing out, it's a social disaster for the country. And I think looking at these interventions from the past, do we look at Māori-specific financing schemes, large-scale social housing, income-related rents, these sort of processes again? What we then did was to undertake 28 interviews, and Diane did this work across the country with Māori housing experts, and we asked them, what do you think are the interventions that needed? And we hear the same story again: increase the numbers of state houses, alternative financing options. But there are a lot richer suite of alternative financing options now that have been mentioned other than direct lending. Sort of rent-to-buy schemes, shared equity schemes, impact investments, loan guarantees, iwi Crown public partnerships. Now this is popping up strongly now as the post-settlement iwi building their capital base and their ability to form partnerships with the Crown. And I think this is perhaps where we might get sort of initiatives with culturally congruent housing being developed that fits within a Crown-funded model. And I'm certainly seeing Ngāi Tahu's going down that track now with their shared equity scheme, which is about to be, which is under development and be launched. And also other ideas like intergenerational mortgages and direct lending, but perhaps intergenerational mortgages aren't the greatest idea. Also, they mention increasing the quality of rental accommodation, and leaders, mentors, educators to support Māori into housing, financial literacy, guidance to overcome various hurdles, cultural, bureaucratic, and that limit housing security. Regulatory reform, competition in the market, all these sorts of things, and tax reform. But these were the key themes popping through from those Māori housing experts, which bounce back to sort of a back to the future type approach, where you're sort of embracing what's kind of already been done or already been known, but adapting it for the current context. And so we're in the next, sort of thinking about the next phase of our research or areas where we want to head. So we want to look at how we might model these different interventions and project what the social and economic effects for Māori might be. Now here's our, some of the publications that were related to what I've spoken about. They will be on the website. So addressing the Māori housing crisis, that looks at all the trends that I was outlining. And then Diane's work, Diane's done immersive work around emergency housing needs. It's a very good paper. And then also Jay Whitehead and Grace's work, which is exploring those factors between affecting Māori home ownership. And just to note that that those associative factors were based in Christchurch, which will have an effect. You may not be able to pull it out and say nationally this is the effect, but yeah. So, kia ora.